You only need to know me. I will be the one.
I think Oda foreshadowed what Shanks would do to Greenbull way back in chapter 434 when the wood of Whitebeard's ship was cracked by Shanks' spirit just taking a step aboard. And now we see Greenbull, a forest man made of wood, crushed by the same weight of Shanks' haki. Okay, maybe that's a reach, but in all seriousness, all Shanks has to do is blink, and an admiral runs away. Think about that for a moment. Maybe it's somewhat of an exaggeration of what we saw in chapter 1055, but it's insane how Shanks has canonically intimidated 2 admirals, now with his mere presence alone. His spiritual pressure is finally confirmed to be overwhelming for even characters at this level of strength. It'd be interesting to see how a Yonko would respond to this same attack, although I'd imagine Yonkos, just like admirals, vary in their strength as well. I don't think Kaido or Big Mom is going to run away in terror like Greenbull did this chapter. Although it's not just Greenbull that has showed appreciation now for Shanks' impressive haki. We saw early on during pre-time skip, Whitebeard and his top commanders Jozu and Marco viscerally react to Shanks' haki as he boarded their ship, and the more fodder characters collapsed. The exact words as the wood on their ship cracked, as Shanks' conqueror's haki or spirit broke the foundations of reality, inflicting damage on the surroundings that a ship as polished and of such material quality as the Whitebeard pirate ship could be damaged is impressive. But Shanks says he was just being a little bit of a threat, as Whitebeard praises the impressive spirit of that man, red-haired Shanks, whose haki is amazing as always. What Shanks did to Greenbull is a feat we have yet to see from Luffy, in so much as scaring off a first commander or admiral level character with his haki alone. Correct me if I'm wrong. But after defeating Kaido, just imagine how much stronger Luffy's conqueror's haki has become and will be the next time it is seriously displayed. But for this video, we are going to be going over what lies in store for Advanced Conqueror's haki and what Shanks might show us as to what it can really do, so that we have an idea of just how strong Luffy will become by the end of the series. So from chapter 1055, we see that Shanks has his hand on the hilt of his sword. Who knows if he is using or can use his sword as a medium to channel the focus of this attack even more. Although I think we have seen that already with Kaido's club and Luffy's punch, which makes Shanks' release of his Advanced Conqueror's haki in the air for a targeted attack miles away from his opponent Greenbull even more impressive. The level of focus and skill required to achieve that is mind-boggling. Add to that how Shanks' haki was felt miles away by Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbei. Shanks, if he wanted, maybe, could literally stand on his boat and bend an entire country to his will, which is an idea we will come back to, bending others to your will. But what Shanks did in this moment is reminiscent of something that happened to Luffy when Kaido knocked him into the water. Luffy fell into the water and something was activated within him after non-stop defeats at the hands of Kaido. 2 parallel moments really. First on the land of Wano Kuni itself, when Kaido knocks out Luffy only for Luffy to then unconsciously use Conqueror's haki. We then see later, after falling from Onigashima, Luffy, who has just tapped into the power of Advanced Conqueror's haki, fall into the water and awaken a new level of the voice of all things, it would appear, communicating while seemingly unconscious again, his voice projecting outward and reaching people a great distance away, maybe even miles away like Shanks. The Heart Pirates in their submarine hear Luffy as well as Momonosuke on Onigashima, who relays Luffy's words to the Alliance to keep fighting and that he was going to beat Kaido, it wasn't over yet. Even Momonosuke's reaction to Luffy's voice telepathically descending upon him looks the same as Greenbull's reaction to getting hit by Shanks' haki, as if someone was in his mind, in his head. And to further question if Shanks also has the voice of all things, or something similar to the ability. Recall that this reaction is the same as Momonosuke and Luffy when Zunisha spoke to them, again, someone in their heads. But there is a distinction that leads us to ask if Shanks is combining his voice of all things or observation haki with Conqueror's haki. And if the voice of all things is tied to observation haki, then Shanks is combining different colors of haki together to create new shades, just as what Luffy used to defeat Kaido was a combination of Rio or Armet haki and Conqueror's haki. I think Sawyer might have been one of the first YouTubers to mention this possibility, but Luffy will eventually learn to do what Shanks can do, and as I point out, in some ways he already has. The notion of Shanks' voice in the voice of all things is interesting if he does have this ability, and given Shanks showing up in Wano aligns closely with the release of the One Piece film Red movie, in which there are rumors that match Shanks intimidating with his Conqueror's haki not just Greenbull in chapter 1055, or Akainu on Marineford based on Akainu's visible reaction here. But in the One Piece film Red leaks, apparently Shanks forces Kizaru and Fujitora or one of them to retreat, after they see his haki. Aside from the sheer destruction a fight between admirals and a Yonko would cause. More importantly, there is a character named Yuta, who is believed to be Shanks' daughter. Not sure if it's a biological child, but Yuta's voice is described as otherworldly, and her voice ties into her cheerful and optimistic personality, and her strong ideal to build a new era of peace and happiness through her voice. And so, the new era Shanks spoke of when attacking Greenbull, as Shanks' Conqueror's haki rose as black lightning from his ship and crossed over to the mainland of Wano to strike Greenbull. Shanks' voice seemingly traveling over as well in the form of his spirit, as if maybe the breath or spirit of all things and the voice of all things can connect with others via the spirit. Greenbull is paralyzed and screams in pain as Shanks' Conqueror's haki descends upon him, and Shanks gives one of his best speeches in the series, a character-defining moment, as Shanks says, while thinking of Luffy, Momonosuke, Hiyori, and it would appear Yuta in the corner, the next generation. Shanks says while echoing Yuta's dream of a new world, "I won't say you're despicable or cowardly, but a marine targeting those new leaves that just changed pirate history. I think it is tasteless. Are you that afraid of the coming new era?" Oda is definitely making a statement here about the importance of one's voice in influencing people in the world. It can't just be a coincidence, the ability to influence others. Do we finally have our answer or a partial answer aside from a natural charisma? Why this trait is so common in conquerors, natural-born leaders, influencers, budding YouTubers like myself. Why do we all have this ability? I'm reminded of something else I've pointed out in prior videos. Chapter 1 touches upon Shanks, but two others who are also intertwined, Roger and Luffy. We begin the story of One Piece with the speech, "The Voice of a King," as Goldie Roger used his final words to inspire and influence others, ushering in a new age, a new era. Without raising a fist or firing a bullet, it was this speech that became the shot heard around the world. And so, there was an amazing scene during Drum Kingdom arc. Oda directly alludes to all three forms of haki, when Chopper asks, "What are pirates?" The response, "A pirate. Pirates are great men of the sea. They have a body hard like stone, the eyes of an eagle, and a voice that tears the sky asunder." A body hard like stone, armament, the eyes of an eagle, observation, and a voice that tears the sky apart, that affects and transforms the very world would be conquerors. The eagle part of observation alludes to Hawkeye's Mihawk, I think, as having maybe the best observation in the story, described as the clairvoyant one, able to not just see but perceive and understand everything, we think. On the other hand, Shanks is considered like Roger the embodiment of what a real pirate is in the One Piece world, and so these men that lack devil fruits are described by Dr. Hurley's speech perfectly, as is their voice. Shanks maybe has the strongest conqueror's haki, the greatest spirit at the present moment. But this idea of tearing the sky asunder with one's voice, it's as if Roger's words, his will, his dying example truly did light a spark, as Rayleigh had described, to instill a sense of hope and yearning in those present that day, to carry on and begin the golden age of pirates. You have to wonder if haki, spirit, is directly linked to the power to inspire, kind of like reading the room and sensing people's energy. And so telepathy, and even more than that, the power to influence others, their minds, that Luffy seems to share with his father Monkey D. Dragon, as noticed by not just Dracula Mihawk, but also Ivankov on Marineford and Impel Down. The most fearsome power on these seas might also be tied to the true power of conqueror's haki, beyond just a natural charisma that leads others to follow you, and so the freedom to follow versus forcing people to follow you. A voice or spirit that can influence the entire world and just maybe force it to change. The greatest pirates have a voice that tears the sky asunder, a spirit that splits the sky. We saw in Luffy's fight versus Kaido, the skies split from collision of their conquering wills as Luffy voices aloud that so long as he was alive, as long as he was still breathing, anything was possible. Luffy's words and will in that moment reaching the heavens as the skies parted, which is something I've wondered about happening when Zoro fights Mihawk for the final time. Zoro as a child promising his own name or victory would reach the heavens, and we can assume Mihawk possibly has conquerors as well. And so when I brought up Shanks' power to influence Greenbull earlier, a voice or spirit that can influence the entire world and just maybe force it to change, I pointed out the beauty of this contradiction before. Luffy, a man that doesn't want to conquer or rule or control anyone or anything, even though he wants to be king. It's simply because the Pirate King is the freest man on the seas. And doesn't that sound like the perfect ruler? The person most deserving to be king is the one who doesn't want it to begin with. The one who doesn't crave power, and so he is at least likely to abuse it. I wonder how this contradiction will play out for Luffy, the greatest conqueror but simultaneously the freest man. Someone that doesn't bow to anyone but also wants no one to bow to him. What would Luffy do if he had Shanks' power? What would someone evil do? What would Imu-sama do? Imu, whose eyes raise a lot of questions. Eyes similar to Mihawk's based on the silhouette we see of him. Imagine mind control. Can you tame another human being the same way Luffy could tame and force animals to submit to him? Could Imu do this? Could someone else? The king of the world should have some of the most powerful conquerors' haki, right? What sort of kingly ambition does the king of the world, Imu, have? Does his will influence the Gorosei in any way as a parallel to the god or kami of Skypiea, Enel, ruling his subordinates with lightning? Maybe advanced conquerors, and so red and black lightning for Imu. Imagine if Imu could do to someone whatever was done to force Zunisha to walk the seas, such that a voice can be projected to give that thing or person a command. An inherited will then becomes eternal servitude. The command endures, stretching across time, even space, and so long distances. I'd also point out how when Rayleigh was showing Luffy exactly what Conqueror's Haki can do, Rayleigh coincidentally used his Conqueror's Haki to tame an elephant, and maybe that is tied to Zunisha. Maybe that's what's happened. Maybe somebody in the distant past used their will to force Zunisha to walk for eternity. But a voice or spirit that tears the sky asunder, forcing the clouds to part, it ties back into the theories about conquerors influencing the weather, and I made a whole video on that, so we won't go over it again too much here. Big Mom and Kaido have done this. Shanks, when visited by Mihawk, did the same thing. Shanks said he was in a bad mood, and this seems to correlate with the change in weather, as did the weather brightening when Shanks turned happy or joyful upon hearing news of Luffy's bounty. Just as we see the weather change in chapter 1055 when Shanks uses his haki. The weather coincidentally changing because of his anger again as well. In chapter 1055, Shanks' anger caused the weather to shift and the clouds to darken as he spoke of the new era. And we see this once again, Shanks referencing this reckless new era as he clashed swords with Whitebeard, the darkening skies, both suggestive of his power and the coming storm. If you can control the weather, you have domain over the seas, don't you? This might be why Monkey D. Dragon is so powerful, whether it is Conqueror's Haki or his Wind Devil Fruit. It also leads to an old community theory, one that I've explained on my channel in the past, about the storm that suddenly appeared to save Roger during his fight with Shiki. This storm being similar to the storm that appeared after Roger died, Monkey D. Dragon walking through the falling rain, as well as the storm that appeared when Luffy was about to similarly be executed in Logtown, the same town where Roger had been executed. A sudden storm struck and saved him, as well as lightning, and we know that Monkey D. Dragon appeared thereafter, and so some suggest it is indicative of those that carry the will of D, those that bring a sudden storm. Monkey D. Dragon, Luffy, Roger, and maybe Shanks too. But there is an alternative explanation that comes from a line by Rayleigh on Sabaody, a line from Rayleigh that inspired Luffy to tell him the following, that he had no desire to conquer anything, that to become Pirate King was to become the freest man in the world. Prior to this, Rayleigh had asked Luffy if he could do it. What the Grand Line has in store for you is beyond your imagination. Your enemies will be strong. Can you control this wild sea? Maybe this was a hint, a suggestion of sorts, that the conqueror that ultimately rises above them all is not one who clings to power but relinquishes it, one that welcomes the coming new era. To tame something is not to change the way it is, but to simply allow it to be. And so, during the Battle of Ed War, when Shiki asked Gold D. Roger to join him in conquering the world, Roger's words now hold deeper meaning as the very weather and ocean currents seem to respond. That he, Roger, like Luffy, had no desire to conquer anything, that the true meaning of piracy was to be free. And with these words, it's as if the sea, the very world, finally recognized its own true king, for the resultant storm swept Roger onwards to become the greatest pirate that had ever lived. Again, influence, a voice that tears the sky asunder, a will that challenges the heavens and the gods and splits the clouds apart, commanding domain over all things in this world, maybe even life and death, which we'll get to shortly. but I just wanted to say that while it might be tied to conquerors, what Roger did or what someone else did to save him, it could be tied to Uranus as well, the egg on Roger's ship, if it is Uranus and if it can control the weather, or the tides as some believe. It's also worth adding something I and others have brought up in the past, the Jolly Roger of Goldie Roger. Jolly Rogers are often depictions or symbols as to a specific characteristic of pirates. The captain the Jolly Roger is attributed to, Shanks' scar, Luffy's straw hat for example. But this mustache of the Jolly Roger for Goldie Roger is strange because it's designed in a way that looks like rippling or flowing waves. Maybe a flag indicative of one that has conquered the oceans to become a master of the sea, the pirate king whose actions sent shock waves around the world, ushering in the new pirate era. Maybe Roger's Jolly Roger is a hint that he had this ability to control the waves, the very oceans, with his will, that his influence was so strong it could affect the very world around him, even the sea. I also think it is worth asking now how Shanks conquers Haki is so strong, or why it is so strong. Is it in any way tied to who he truly is? Conqueror's Haki tends to run in the family, although it cannot be learned, it seems to be unlocked, typically under stressful situations. Doflamingo and Ace's children are a few examples. Luffy unlocked his 2 years ago, showing early signs before fully unleashing his power during Amazon Lily and Marineford, to rescue others, including Ace. And so, what does Shanks go through to unlock or use conquerors for the very first time? What type of trauma did he experience as a child, or who was he trying to save maybe? What was he attempting to do that demanded he display such an incredible will or conquering spirit? Moreover, if related to one's bloodline, and if a reflection of those what kingly ambition is told to us by numerous characters in the story at this point, then what is Shanks' ambition for his Haki in the present day to be so strong? But bloodline, who is Shanks' father or mother? Luffy is the son of Monkey D. Dragon, both have Conqueror's Haki. Can Dragon do what Shanks can do? And I believe by the end of the series, Luffy's Conqueror's Haki will rival or surpass Shanks' own spirit. Maybe that's one way to see if Luffy is ready. If Luffy's ambition is great enough or greater than Shanks. Imagine Luffy approaches Shanks akin to Sasuke approaching Itachi for a battle of minds or genjutsu, just standing there testing one another. Imagine Luffy approaches Shanks and their wills collide, channeled in a way that focuses the entirety of their Conqueror's Haki on one another to see whose will break first. I hope Oda does something like that, even if he goes with the common theory of a Davy back fight. After all, Luffy doesn't have a sword, even if Shanks does. I doubt they're going to punch each other and clash their fists together. But speaking of lineage, Ace had Conqueror's Haki, even though we only see him use it as a child, I think to save Luffy. Ace's mother was Porcus D. Rouge, and his father was the Pirate King Goldie Roger, who had no devil fruit, just an impressive conquering spirit that could go toe-to-toe with the world's strongest man, Whitebeard, who had the devil fruit power to destroy the world. Imagine how strong your spirit has to be to clash with a literal earthquake. I've also pointed out how strong your spirit has to be to endure as long as Roger did, an incurable disease, of course, with the help of Crocus's medicine, and in this way to overcome death. Doflamingo had conquerors, and so celestial dragons can have it if it runs or turns out Shanks is a celestial dragon. If Shanks is the son of Roxy Zebek, that would make even more sense since Zebek was considered Roger's first and greatest adversary. We don't know if Zebek had a devil fruit, but imagine how strong Zebek's will must have been to rival Roger's. Imagine how strong of a conqueror Zebek was to have an ambition to become the king of the world. And so the world's greatest king, the world's greatest conqueror. And if Zebek was Shanks' father, which still remains to be seen, then that terrifying bloodline flows through him too, or whatever lineage Shanks is descended from. A hint maybe is given to us from Whitebeard in terms of Shanks' Haki, and overall ability being terrifying, when Whitebeard tells Shanks after he boards his ship that the injury he got from that certain guy aches whenever Whitebeard looks at Shanks' face, like father like son, or like adopted father like son, Zebek or Roger, king of the world or the pirate king. But what else can Shanks or Advanced Conqueror's Haki do? Barriers for one, spiritual pressure that nothing can pass through, not people or items. I think this was teased in a One Piece video game and hinted at in the series by Big Mom unconsciously blocking Capone's missiles with her spirit. Interesting that Shanks' ship is known as the Red Force, and so Red and Black Conqueror's Haki, Red and Black Force Field, the Red Force. Imagine if Shanks surrounded his entire island or base or ship with his spiritual pressure. Nobody able to approach unless they're strong enough, which seems to be admiral level characters at a minimum, maybe some commanders. Looking at Greenbull again, in the exact moment Shanks conquers Haki made impact, I've seen some say that it looks as if Shanks turned off Greenbull's Devil Fruit. That maybe Conqueror's Haki can influence not just your soul, but the soul of the Devil Fruit you consumed, shutting it off if your conquering will is strong enough. Which is an interesting idea given that Armored Haki can also interact to make Devil Fruit users with modified bodies tangible to be damaged. Whether Paramecia rubber men or men made of steel or Logia users that are otherwise intangible. So why would Conquerors, which directly influences the will or spirit of others, be any different? Although this is the manga, so the anime might show us Greenbull reverting to his normal form on his own. Importantly, what Shanks did to Greenbull, striking terror into him such that he was paralyzed and decided to flee, it's a callback to Zoro striking terror into Monet, paralyzing her own movements. With even Tashigi pointing out that Monet's body was paralyzed with fear, that Zoro in an instance many believed had foreshadowed his conquerors. Zoro had projected his killing intent, letting his opponent know the terror of his overwhelming strength, something the anime even showcased again in Wano when Zoro was in some gambling room and fought some Yakuza or samurai or whatever. His move is similar to what he used on Monet. It is called Dragon Quake. Zoro seemingly cuts nothing, which is the technique his master at the dojo had hinted at, although we could make an argument Zoro did cut something, and it was the spirits of his opponents. He conquered them with his blade, using his sword as a medium to cut and break their wills as if their spirits were shattered blades. I'd assume Shanks and Mihawk, his swordsmen, can do the same thing, and some have pointed out how Dracula Mihawk did the same thing to Luffy in a way, except the intent wasn't to paralyze him, but Mihawk's killing intent was conveyed through his own aura or conquering spirit maybe. And that stopped Luffy in his tracks. Although some question if Luffy accidentally tapped into future sight, but I prefer the intimidation explanation. Zoro even said about Mihawk when he first met him that the hawk-eyed man Mihawk's glare was sharp enough to kill a man. Potential foreshadowing. And so Shanks intimidated Greenbull. Can we reasonably say now that he intimidated Akainu on Marineford as well? When he blocked Akainu's attack of Kobe with his sword, his Conqueror's Haki was released, maybe an early display of advanced Conquerors, but Oda just didn't show us at the time. A spirit that could resist Akainu's magma. Or maybe Shanks did not use advanced Conquerors, but it's simply that his spirit is so strong even the most casual of blocks from him caused his Conquerors to leak, or seep out of his body, in this case his sword, when he swings. A callback to him telling Whitebeard he was only trying to be a little bit of a threat, and so not going all out, and so this action that caused Akainu to stand still temporarily. Sweat pouring off his face, not because he's magma, because we don't see him or Ace of Fire Logia sweating all the time. But maybe Akainu was legitimately, if only for a second, intimidated by Shanks for whatever reason. Not that Akainu couldn't give Shanks a run for his money, but it's worth considering why. As I mentioned in several videos now, Shanks' anger should parallel Roger's own. Roger, whose anger was notorious and brought up by Garp. How when Roger was angry, he would become a demon whose rage was even known to wipe out an entire country's military. In chapter 588, we see that Roger's anger was similar to Shanks and expressed for similar reasons. No one hurts a friend of his, especially a crewmate. Roger would run toward danger to save those he cared about, just as Shanks walked into the middle of a war on Marineford and challenged the world, striking fear into Akainu and also Blackbeard turning tail and running away, saying he wasn't ready for Shanks just yet, despite acquiring 2 devil fruits. In the Ace novel, it was even said that Shanks was terrifying if you angered him. He was angry when he stopped Akainu. He was angry when Blackbeard mocked his scar. He was angry when he sent Greenbull packing. It would seem that emotional states do have influence over your power level, how strong you are in the moment. We've seen this with Sanji's Diable Jambe. The output of Haki then, especially Conquerors, is connected since we know emotions can influence the use of future sight, whether you are calm or not. Maybe anger or resolution of some kind influences the strength of your will, and so Conquerors. Maybe one day Oda will fully unleash Shanks' anger in battle. While we might never see Roger actually go all out in the story, I've always believed Shanks was the living embodiment or relic of his captain, the Pirate King's power in his prime. Mind you, Shanks in Oda's words was not affected by losing his arm. His strength did not decrease, just as Roger's deteriorating health did not negatively affect his overall strength either. And so, like father, like adopted son. Or at least the data book stated, Shanks' powers with one arm was still overwhelming, and I've seen some people interpret this as Shanks not losing his strength, but we'll see. Just as Eustace Kid lost an arm and did not get any weaker, compensating with his Devil Fruit power, I'm sure Shanks compensated his loss of an arm with his hockey abilities, with the power of his spirit. And in this way, I've wondered in the video you can see on the screen whether Shanks, like his Captain Roger, are able to overcome physical loss, even an impending death, through sheer willpower alone. Check that video out after this if you have time. Maybe Shanks losing his arm actually made him stronger. Maybe Shanks' spirit got stronger from that ordeal. The old saying that adversity makes the man. The more you lose, the more you gain. Trials and tribulations. But since we have some concrete proof now that Shanks has the strongest hockey in the verse, maybe making him the strongest or one of the strongest characters in the series, definitely top 5 if not top 3, what would Shanks' title be, if he has one? After all, his rival Mihawk is the world's strongest swordsman. Shanks' Captain Roger's rival Whitebeard is the world's strongest man. Kaido is the world's strongest creature. Big Mom was said on Elbaf to be a god of destruction. Luffy is supposedly Joy Boy or the sun god Nika. Roger was just a great pirate until he became Pirate King. I'm sure Shanks has a title too, but I'm not sure what it would be in terms of its importance to the story. But maybe Shanks is the new world's strongest man. Then again, that title might have just been given to Whitebeard because of the Guruguranomi devil fruit he had, which Blackbeard now has. And so Blackbeard then would be the world's strongest man today. So for the sake of the God King Shanks, let's just call him the world's strongest conqueror, a man that possesses the world's strongest spirit. Now, this is a spoiler for the new One Piece movie, a One Piece film read is spoiler, so feel free to skip it if you want to, fair warning. But apparently in the Volume 4 Billion that came out with Film Red, more information about Shanks' powers were revealed in addition to a specific title. He is referred to as the Killer of Observation Haki, or Future Sight, or Future Vision Killer. Apparently Shanks can negate the observation haki or maybe the future sight of his opponent by controlling or influencing their breath with his extraordinary will, and so again, advanced conquerors, the power to influence or conquer all things, not just others or the world, but even yourself. Shanks can supposedly kill or control one's own breath with a move called Sign of Presence. In doing so, his presence disappears and observation haki can't properly detect his actions. The cancellation of his breath causes misdirection and makes Shanks' movements difficult to predict. This might explain how Shanks just happened to appear in the middle of the battle at Marineford. He's lightning fast and can conceal or influence his own presence beyond detection. The same applies to him showing up at Mer Joie, maybe. Although I'm sure there's more to it than that. But some are questioning whether this also applies to others, and so maybe Shanks can intimidate them to such an extent they can't breathe or focus as well. Concentration and remaining fairly calm being key to using Future Sight after all. It's also interesting how the concept of breath ties into the breath of all things, which when Zoro used it against Mr. One, was directly related to observation haki and sensing the world around you. And so maybe the voice of all things is too, or maybe that is somehow tied to conquerors. And Shanks has perhaps mastered the breath and voice of all things together, maybe. And so again, Shanks, the man with the world's strongest spirit, a haki god, a haki master that knows all that haki can do. But as usual, we will have to wait and see. And don't forget to like the video, comment with your thoughts below, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Also click the notification bell. And if you have a Twitter, feel free to give me a follow on there as well. As always, there is more to come. Until next time.
ゼットは今どこにいる？
ルフィ